The moment I found my employer bleeding to death on his marble bathroom floor at 2 a.m., clutching a burner phone with his last conscious breath, I had two choices: call 911 and watch him die while explaining to police why the most feared man in Seoul had an American maid, or use the trauma surgery skills I'd hidden for 3 years and save the life of someone who could destroy me with a single phone call. What I didn't know was that stopping his internal bleeding would make me the only witness to Korea's biggest crime family's deadliest secret. What I definitely didn't know was that falling for your sociopathic employer while he's unconscious in your arms tends to complicate things when he wakes up and remembers you've seen him vulnerable. My name is Morgan Davis, and I came to Seoul 3 years ago running from a medical malpractice lawsuit that destroyed my career, my reputation, and my faith in my ability to save anyone. When you accidentally kill a senator's daughter during emergency surgery because you're working 60-hour shifts with no sleep, America stops being a place where you can practice medicine. South Korea offered anonymity, cash work that didn't require extensive background checks, and distance from the nightmares that woke me every night seeing her face on the operating table. The employment agency that placed me with Choi Woo-jin didn't ask why an American trauma surgeon was willing to work as a live-in housekeeper for below-market wages. They just saw someone desperate enough to clean toilets in a foreign country and asked no questions. Choi Woo-jin's penthouse overlooked the Han River like a fortress designed to keep the world at bay. Bulletproof windows, reinforced doors, security systems that belonged in government buildings, and a man who moved through his home like he was constantly calculating threats. At 34, he was beautiful in the way dangerous things often are, sharp angles and controlled power, with eyes that held the kind of intelligence that had built empires and buried enemies. He spoke perfect English with the crisp accent of someone educated at elite schools, but there was something underneath, something harder and older that money couldn't buy. The rules were simple: clean, cook, maintain absolute silence about household affairs, and never enter his private spaces without permission. He paid in cash, weekly, more than most Seoul salaries. In return, I became invisible. For 3 years, I perfected the art of being a ghost. I learned his routines: morning calls in rapid Korean, afternoon meetings with men in expensive suits who moved like soldiers, evening conference calls that made his voice go ice-cold with authority. I cleaned around conversations about territory disputes and permanent solutions. I prepared meals for men whose suits couldn't quite hide shoulder holsters. I laundered shirts with bloodstains that hydrogen peroxide removed without questions. I was just the help. Foreign, useful, irrelevant. Until that Thursday night when everything changed. I was finishing the evening cleaning routine when I heard the crash from his private bathroom. Not the sound of something falling, the sound of something heavy hitting marble with finality. "Mr. Choi?" I called through the closed door. Silence. I should have called his security detail. Should have followed protocol and waited for his people to handle whatever had happened. Instead, I heard my own voice saying his name again, more urgently, and my hand was already turning the doorknob. He was unconscious on the bathroom floor, blood pooling beneath him from a wound I couldn't immediately locate. His phone was still clutched in his right hand, the call screen showing 37 minutes connected to someone listed only as Dragon. The blood was coming from his abdomen, soaking through his white dress shirt in patterns that made my trauma training fire like muscle memory. Entry wound, no exit wound, internal bleeding, dropping blood pressure based on his skin color and breathing patterns. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands already assessing damage with the clinical detachment that had kept me sane through countless emergency surgeries. Single gunshot wound to the upper abdomen, bullet likely lodged near major organs. He needed surgery immediately or he'd bleed out in minutes. "Woo-jin," I said, checking his pulse. Thready, weak, but present. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. When he saw me leaning over him, something like confusion crossed his face. "Morgan?" His voice was thick with pain and shock. What? You've been shot. I need to get you to a hospital immediately. I was already calculating. Nearest hospital was 12 minutes by ambulance, assuming they could get through Seoul traffic. He didn't have 12 minutes. No. The word came out stronger than it should have from someone losing that much blood. No hospitals. No authorities. You'll die. Better than the alternative. His hand gripped my wrist with surprising strength. Promise me. No hospitals. I stared into his eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there. Whatever world he lived in, whatever business he conducted, medical attention from legitimate sources meant something worse than death. Woo-jin, I can't. You can. His grip tightened. You were a surgeon. I know who you are, Morgan Davis. Johns Hopkins, trauma surgery residency, 3 years at Chicago General before the incident with Senator Morrison's daughter. Ice flooded my veins. How do you? I know everything about the people in my house. The question is whether you remember enough to save my life. I looked at this man who'd employed me for 3 years, who'd somehow known my deepest shame and greatest failure, who was now bleeding to death while trusting me with his life. The same hands that had killed Rebecca Morrison through exhaustion and arrogance were the only things standing between Woo-jin and certain death. I'll need supplies, I heard myself saying. Medical equipment, antibiotics, blood for transfusion. Medical room. 3rd door down the hall. Fully equipped. His breathing was becoming more labored. Morgan. Don't talk. Save your strength. If I don't make it. You're making it. I stood, already moving toward the door. That's not negotiable. The medical room was better equipped than most rural emergency rooms. Surgical instruments, anesthesia, blood products, monitoring equipment, everything needed for major medical procedures in complete secrecy. I worked with the mechanical precision that had made me one of Chicago's most promising trauma surgeons, before exhaustion and arrogance destroyed everything I'd worked for. Local anesthesia first, then exploratory surgery to locate the bullet and identify damaged organs. The bullet had missed major arteries by millimeters, luck or divine intervention, I couldn't tell which. It had nicked his liver and damaged surrounding tissue, but nothing that couldn't be repaired with careful suturing and proper post-operative care. 3 hours later, Woo-jin was stable, sedated, and breathing steadily while I monitored his vital signs with equipment that probably cost more than my medical school tuition. I should have left him to recover and pretended the night never happened. Should have returned to being the invisible help who knew nothing about anything. Instead, I found myself sitting beside his bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, processing the reality that I'd just saved the life of someone who might be Seoul's most dangerous criminal. When he woke 18 hours later, I was still there, adjusting his 4 fluids and checking his surgical site for signs of infection. You stayed, he said quietly, his voice still rough from anesthesia. Someone needed to monitor your recovery. You lost a significant amount of blood and underwent major surgery. He studied my face with an intensity that made me want to look away. You saved my life. I did my job. No. He struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. You did something no one has done in 15 years. You saw me vulnerable and chose to help instead of walking away. Anyone would have. No one would have. His eyes met mine, and I saw something there I'd never seen before, gratitude mixed with confusion, as if kindness was a foreign concept. My own people would have called it a business opportunity. My enemies would have finished the job. You just saved my life because it was the right thing to do. I cleared my throat, professional distance reasserting itself. You need to rest. The surgery was successful, but you'll need at least 2 weeks of limited activity for proper healing. Morgan. Something in his tone made me look at him directly. There was vulnerability there, the kind that came from someone who'd spent years building walls that had just been demolished by circumstance. Thank you. You're welcome, Mr. Choi Woo-jin. I think after seeing me bleed all over my bathroom floor, we can use first names. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Rest, Woo-jin. We'll talk when you're stronger. Over the next 2 weeks, I became his private nurse as well as his housekeeper. Checking his surgical site, monitoring for infection, managing his pain medication, helping him move without tearing stitches. Gradually, our conversations expanded beyond medical necessities. Why did you leave medicine? He asked during his first week of recovery, as I changed his bandages with practiced efficiency. Made a mistake that killed someone. The words came out flat, emotionless. Lost my license, my career, my ability to trust myself with anyone's life. What kind of mistake? I paused in my wound care. I was exhausted. Working too many hours, running on caffeine and arrogance. A senator's 19-year-old daughter came in with what looked like routine appendicitis. I missed the signs that it was actually ectopic pregnancy with massive internal bleeding. By the time I realized my error, she'd lost too much blood to save. You were sleep-deprived and overworked? That's not an excuse. I secured his new bandage, noting the healthy pink color of healing tissue. I took an oath to do no harm. I failed. And you've been punishing yourself ever since. I've been ensuring it never happens again by not putting myself in situations where my incompetence can kill people. Woo-jin caught my wrist as I moved to clean up my supplies. You just saved my life with precision that would have impressed surgeons at Seoul National University. Whatever happened in Chicago, you're not that same exhausted resident making decisions beyond your capacity. You don't know that. I know that I'm alive because of your skill. I know that you've spent 3 years convincing yourself you don't deserve to practice medicine when Korea's medical system would benefit from your expertise. I pulled my hand free, stepping back to restore professional distance. Your wound is healing well. You should be able to return to normal activities by next week. What if I told you I had a proposition for you? I'd say I'm not interested in whatever business you conduct. He smiled, and for the first time since I'd known him, it looked genuinely amused rather than predatory. Not that kind of proposition. A medical one. I paused in my cleanup, curiosity overriding caution. I have people in my organization who can't seek traditional medical care for obvious reasons. Gunshot wounds, knife injuries, trauma that requires surgical intervention but can't be reported to authorities. They usually die or suffer permanent damage because we can't risk hospital involvement. You want me to be your personal trauma surgeon. I want to offer you the chance to practice medicine again. Save lives instead of cleaning bathrooms. Use your skills for something that matters. Illegal medicine. Underground surgery. Medicine for people who have nowhere else to turn. His expression grew serious. These aren't innocent civilians, Morgan. They're people who chose a dangerous life knowing the risks. But they're still human. They still deserve medical care when they're bleeding to death. I stared at him, processing the offer. The chance to practice medicine again, to use skills I'd buried under shame and self-recrimination. But in service to criminals, violent people whose injuries came from hurting others. Why me? Because you're brilliant. Because you saved my life when you could have let me die without consequences. Because you understand what it's like to carry the weight of losing someone and you won't make careless mistakes. And because I'm already compromised by being here illegally. That too. He didn't insult my intelligence by denying it. But mainly because I trust you. That's not something I've felt about anyone in a very long time. Before I could answer, alarms started shrieking throughout the penthouse. Security lights flashed red, and through the bulletproof windows I could see black vehicles surrounding the building. What's happening? I asked, but Woo-jin was already moving, ignoring his surgical restrictions as he reached for weapons hidden throughout the room. Rival family. They must have learned I was injured, seen it as an opportunity to eliminate competition. He winced as movement pulled at his stitches. Morgan, there's a safe room behind the bookcase. You need to. You're 2 weeks post-operative. You can't fight with fresh surgical wounds. I can't hide either. My people need to see me strong or this organization falls apart. Gunfire erupted from the building's lower levels. Professional, coordinated, military-style assault. How many attackers? I asked, my mind already shifting into emergency mode. Unknown. Does it matter? It matters for triage planning. I moved to his medical supplies, gathering trauma equipment with practiced efficiency. If your people are going to fight, they're going to get hurt. You want them to survive, you need medical support on site. Morgan. This is what I do, Woo-jin. This is who I am underneath the guilt and shame. When people are dying, I save them. I loaded supplies into portable trauma bags. Your proposition? I accept. Starting now. What followed was the most intense medical experience of my life. 6 hours of treating gunshot wounds, knife injuries, and trauma that pushed my surgical skills to their limits. Working in makeshift conditions while violence raged around us, saving lives with equipment meant for single patient care. When dawn broke over Seoul, 12 attackers were dead, 18 of Woo-jin's people were wounded but alive, and I had performed surgery that would have challenged any trauma team. You saved them all, Woo-jin said quietly, finding me in his medical room as I cleaned blood from my hands for the 100th time. That's what I do. No. He moved closer, close enough that I could smell gunpowder and antiseptic on his clothes. What you do is extraordinary. What you are is extraordinary. I looked up at him, seeing something in his eyes that made my heart skip. Not just gratitude, but something deeper. Something that looked suspiciously like the same feeling that had been growing in my chest over weeks of caring for him. Woo-jin. I know this complicates everything. I know what I am, what my world is. I know that caring about someone in my position is dangerous for both of us. Then why say it? Because almost dying made me realize that spending my life protecting myself from vulnerability just means I'm already dead. He reached up to touch my face, his fingers gentle despite the calluses of violence. Because you've saved my life twice now, and I'm starting to think you might be worth risking everything for. I leaned into his touch, feeling 3 years of emotional walls crumbling. This is insane. Completely. Your enemies will use me against you. My enemies will learn that threatening you means declaring war. I'm still the woman who killed Rebecca Morrison. You're the woman who saved my life and 18 others without hesitation. You're the woman who chose healing over hiding. His thumb traced my cheekbone. You're the woman I'm falling in love with despite every rational reason not to. When he kissed me, it tasted like promise and possibility despite the violence that surrounded us. Like healing despite the wounds we both carried. Like coming alive despite the ghosts that haunted us. When we broke apart, his phone was ringing with what would undoubtedly be the first of many crisis calls requiring his attention. So what happens now? I asked. Now we build something together. You practice medicine, save lives, remember who you were before guilt convinced you otherwise. I learned to trust someone with my vulnerability. We face whatever comes next as partners. And the people who attacked tonight? His smile was sharp, dangerous, completely at odds with the gentle way he still held my face. They learn that threatening my people has consequences. Especially when one of my people happens to be the most skilled trauma surgeon in Seoul. As he answered his phone and shifted back into crime lord mode, I realized I'd found something I thought I'd lost forever, not just the chance to practice medicine, but the chance to belong somewhere. To matter to someone. To use my skills for something larger than my own shame. The forbidden had become inevitable. The maid had become the surgeon. The criminal had become the man I loved. And in Seoul's unforgiving underworld, we were about to discover whether love and medicine could survive in a world built on violence and secrets. But as Woo-jin coordinated his response to the night's attacks, neither of us noticed the encrypted message being sent to handlers in Tokyo. Phase 1 complete. Target has acquired emotional attachment as predicted. The American surgeon is now the key to destroying the Choi organization from within. The war for Seoul's underworld was just beginning, and I was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who's been planning your downfall since the moment you thought you found salvation.